I'm going to further break down my thought process as I'm doing the very foundations of a figure drawing, mainly setting up a good, stable structure, and I'm going to stick with this pose right here as an example. I like this pose a lot because it's very dynamic. It really feels like a moment you might want to capture in a comic, and you really get the feel of action and movement. And it would also look pretty cool as an animation as well. And there's things about it that makes it dynamic. Like the different directions of the limbs and how the chest is facing a different direction than the hips and how the toes are also facing completely different directions. So there's like a twist to this. The face is facing also a different direction than the chest and the hips. So that's what I feel like makes it so dynamic. Anyway, here's my thought process, or I'll try to be really articulate about my thought process as I'm drawing this. I almost always start with the head because it makes sense to me, or just out of habit. Then, going with line of body, I would start with line of shoulders. So often you'll have all these other poses that, let's say a person is hunched over, you'll definitely want to observe where the chin is compared to where the line of shoulders is. That helps a lot. And then I'm gonna observe where the hips are, or the pelvis. Probably something like this. Well, I'm mainly looking off of what the clothing is telling me, which actually, here's a tip. Clothing tells you a lot. What this line over here tells us is that the torso is probably facing a little bit more downwards, and then the curvature of this over here, around the thigh, of the shorts, tells us that the leg is coming out and towards us, but from pelvis to knee, it's going down. So that's like one thing to observe. And then I'm gonna try to get like the rough angle of this leg. And there's a lot of foreshortening with this foot, so that I will try to fix later. But again, with gesture drawing, you want to get the basics down as much as possible. And I'll probably need to adjust the head according to where it actually is. So actually, what I need to notice is also where the joints are. I should probably have mentioned first thing. Line of shoulders, line of hips, joints, and get to the ends of the limbs also as quickly as possible. My first goal was to put down the representation of the most important parts. Any part that needs to be represented. The head, the limbs, the torso, the feet, the hands, and the angles of such parts, roughly. And again, remember, you can always fix it later, especially if you decide to spend more time on it. So I'm sure there's plenty of mistakes that I have made, and so I'm going to try to fix it. And actually, it's possible that this might be the shirt coming up from his movement, but it also could be that like his head is actually a little bit lower. So I'm going to try to portray how like his head is off like this way, and the neck is going off in this direction, like looking like it's like going this way, and yet his gaze is like off to our left. And I totally forgot to mention, it's a pretty good idea to draw crosshairs on heads to quickly indicate their orientation. And I would say you can do either a round shape, like a kind of like an egg shape, making sure that the chin is pointed and the top and back of the head are more rounded. Or you can do a cube shape. You can also do a combination. I was about to do a combination just now. But this is especially useful if you're trying to draw a head facing off in a direction. Like if you're trying to draw a head facing upwards, but then you might want to round it out to really get a feel for like the back of the head and stuff like that. Actually, by this angle, you probably have the chin, the curve of the jaw to chin, like curve like that, maybe. But yeah, a combination of that sort of rounded shape and the cube or box shape is also fine. It's kind of situational, I would say, according to the angle or the pose. Anyway, so here's one fix. Then I'll probably get into like re-angling this and articulating this a little bit more. Generally, in figure drawing, I don't get too much into detail with hands because it's actually about the entire figure rather than smaller details, so I don't get into faces much. And then I'm gonna get the rough idea of the muscular structure. And if there's loose clothing, then you kind of do have to use your imagination. I will also a lot of times try to articulate the orientation of the torso by not only doing line of shoulder, but also line of chest. So over here, I could see that like from shoulder to shoulder, like with the collarbone, it might be something like this. But because I feel as if the chest is like he's a little bent over forward, then having this line go this way kind of bends him forward a bit. And then this bend from torso to hip creates that effect over there. And also try to draw through, even if there's an object or a part that's in front of that part, because you'll want to make sure that it follows through. Like, you know, don't be one of those people who draws like pants or a skirt and then does something like this with the legs. What you want to do is if you draw that, then you want to draw the body first, because there's a body underneath the clothes. Oof, I'm trying to do this really fast here. And then you draw the skirt so that everything follows through and makes sense as the legs come out the other side and so on, right? You could draw the clothes if you want to practice the relationship between the figure and the action and fabrics. Because if you're a comic artist or an animator, or you want to tell stories with this kind of imagery, then this would be a good skill to practice. So that's another bit of a breakdown on my thought process of relatively like quicker figure drawing.